welcome you all here and congratulate the museum on becoming technological with the scanning of this wonderful history that's housed here in Largs. And basically the reason for our visit today is focused on Governor Brisbane, and we come from the city of Brisbane, of course, in Australia, Queensland, Australia. Governor Brisbane been born here in Largs and buried here in Largs next door in the graveyard attached to the church. It's interesting when you reflect on Governor Brisbane and his career, and so many different careers. One of them was as an astronomer. And it just so happens, as I understand it, that today is the summer solstice. So what a perfect visiting time to come here to Largs to honour Governor Brisbane and his history. His history, of course, is a military history as well, the Duke of Wellington ultimately leading to the conquering of a French fellow called Napoleon. And it's interesting how Governor Brisbane moved to Australia, and his motivation there was not so much to administrate the colony of New South Wales, which was his job, but to map the heavens of the Southern Hemisphere. He had mapped the heavens of the Northern Hemisphere, mapped the planets and the stars, and he did that because he wanted to preserve his life effectively. He didn't trust the ship captains to navigate around the world, and of course he was fighting in battles in the Americas and Europe and for British forces against the dastardly French and I think probably the Spanish. So the reason why the astronomy is so important is because he's recognised in Australia as Australia's first scientist, in the sense that when he became Governor of New South Wales in 1821, he established Australia's first observatory at Parramatta, and there's a monument there to basically celebrate that. And of course, in the city of Brisbane itself, Clem Jones, when he was mayor, was responsible for the establishment of the Sir Thomas Brisbane Planetarium in Brisbane. And Mark Rigby, who has been here on previous visits, hopefully will come here next year, was up until recently, his recent retirement, was the director of that planetarium. So we've got a planetarium in Brisbane that celebrates that connection with astronomy and the contribution that Governor Brisbane made to astronomy around the world. If you go to City Hall in Brisbane, you'll see up on the top floor there's a museum of Brisbane, and there in the museum of Brisbane you'll find one of Sir Thomas Brisbane's telescopes. So we've got a relic there in the Museum of Brisbane. And one of the things that would be nice probably coming out of all this history is a dialogue between this museum and the Museum of Brisbane, which I'm more than happy to facilitate. We have a lot of connections with the Museum of Brisbane. In the Museum of Brisbane, on top of City Hall, there's actually one of the pavilions in the museum is actually called the Clem Jones Pavilion, so there's a real Clem Jones connection there as well. So you'll find Sir Thomas Brisbane's telescope, or one of these telescopes there. Down a few floors, when you come up this big marble staircase in City Hall, Brisbane, you'll see to your right-hand side a large wooden door. Now Valerie knows all about this large wooden door because it was part of the mansion of Sir Thomas Brisbane here, and it's the only real, I think, remaining part of that building, because I understand that the roof was taken off at some stage to avoid paying tax, and unfortunately it was then used for target practice by military who didn't realise what they were doing. But the door survived, and it's now residing safely in City Hall, Brisbane. So there's another relic from Largs that's over there on display for all the public to see. In terms of display, Valerie has written a book, and you've just recently updated it, I think, Valerie. But so your first book on the story of Governor Brisbane didn't dwell too much on the military history, but this last one does, I think. Yeah. And so your first book, with your permission, Valerie, I made arrangements for it to be housed in the State Library in Queensland in a digital form. So anyone in the world now can actually access Valerie's book through that website of the State Library of Queensland. And so that I think kind of underlines the importance of technology in bringing the world closer together, and what you're doing here, Linda, I know in terms of the scanning is making accessible so much history that's stored here in this museum. So I congratulate the museum and you and all the volunteers here, and Jim and everybody else who's and George George is here somewhere. But you've got a great cohort of volunteers here, and I think that speaks for itself. Volunteering, I think, is priceless in every sense of the word, and so I certainly congratulate the volunteers in this museum of preserving the history. And Linda, you're talking about how diligently our predecessors here had been recording meticulously, photograph by photograph, so they can now be scanned and made available to everybody. So the other thing I should mention, which I think is really quite important for Largs, potentially for Largs, is that Brisbane City will be hosting the Olympic Games in 2032. And I think that there's a great opportunity for Largs to benefit from that Olympic Games in the city of Brisbane, in the sense that we've already written to the Lord Mayor, and I've spoken to the Lord Mayor of Brisbane about including Largs in the lead up to the Olympic Games in terms of promotional material and so forth, but also Brisbane and California. Now, Brisbane, California, both Brisbane, California, Largs, Scotland, and City of Brisbane have a connection there through the name of Brisbane, obviously. I can't guarantee that Brisbane in California, it's spelled the same way but pronounced as Americans do, came directly through Governor Brisbane, but there is a fairly evident connection of some kind there. And Brisbane is a city which is based next to San Francisco. So if you go to San Francisco Airport, you drive past Brisbane on the way to San Francisco. And it's called the City of Stars. So anybody in Largs might want to visit Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, and might have a look at Brisbane in California as well. So there's those three linkages. When Clem Jones was mayor of the City of Brisbane, he arranged for the City of Brisbane to have a sister city relationship with Largs here. Now that evaporated after Clem left the mayoralty, and Brisbane for a time was very focused on having the city sister cities in China. You know, we have cities of 10 million people and all the rest of it. And I suspect that the appetite for doing more sister cities in China has ebbed a little bit in the last couple of years. So we will be in discussion with our Lord Mayor about seeing what can be done to elevate the relationship between Largs and the City of Brisbane. May not be sister city as such, but who knows, we'll just wait and see. And so I'm encouraging the North Ayrshire Council to start up a dialogue or restart a dialogue with the City of Brisbane. And earlier today I presented and read out a message from Adrian Schrinner, who's the Lord Mayor of the City of Brisbane, to the North Ayrshire Council. And Ian Murdoch here, I presented to him the written form of the message that I read out. And I'm hoping that that'll reopen the dialogue between the local authority in Brisbane, Australia, and Largs here in North Ayrshire. So I think the idea of all this is to develop as many links as we can between Largs and Brisbane, so that the relationship will become everlasting. And the historical tourism, as I indicated in the earlier meeting today, is very important globally to attract people to different parts of the world. And I can see a real opportunity here in Largs to have a tourist trail involving landmarks involving Governor Brisbane. We've got the Brisbane Bridge, and I don't think I've ever seen the Brisbane Chair, but it's about here somewhere, the Brisbane Chair. And we have obviously the Brisbane House Hotel. We've got the Brisbane Glen. Valerie lives in the Brisbane Glen. And so there are a whole host of different things. And when you consider the influence that Brisbane had, not only here, but around the world, we believe this is something very much worth celebrating. And we've now got a platform, because in terms of the Olympic Games, and one of the things I should mention, and it's interesting how things turned out, is that the opening of the Olympic Games in Brisbane in 2032 is going to be on the 23rd of July, which happens to be the birthday anniversary of Governor Brisbane. So that, in terms of TV networks and other media around the world, we think that that's a nice segue into linking up with the City of Brisbane during the Olympic Games. And hopefully media will start working on these stories over the next few years, leading up to 2032, to elevate the knowledge and awareness, because it's all about knowledge and awareness. If people get to hear what the historical links are. People become fascinated, they want to learn more, and they'll come here and they'll do the trail, they'll do this and do that, and the digital world opens up all sorts of opportunities, as indicated earlier by Jill, which I think is a great idea, using apps. I mean, everyone's walking around with their phones these days, and if you've got easy access to history through those, that'll help to create awareness, because then if you create the awareness, then you'll get people stepping up and saying, well, we'll become advocates for this now, we'll provide funding for it, we'll do this, we'll do that. And historical tourism is worth significant money around the world. And I told a little story about there's a city, one of the regional cities in Queensland called Maryborough. And that's where the author of Mary Poppins used to live while she was a child. If you go to Maryborough, you go to the walk signs, you know, the green man or the red man, it's Mary Poppins with the umbrella for the green and red. So it just gives you an example of what some councils have recognised. Well, this is actually quite a historical link that'll interest people, and they'll come to Maryborough to see the walk signs, you know, apart from anything else. And I'd just like to thank you all for all the work that you've done to preserve the history of this place, and I look forward to a lot of blue sky opportunities between the City of Brisbane and Largs over the next few years, particularly leading up to the Olympic Games in 2032. So thank you.
Thank you.